Like many of you who've spoken over the last day and a half, I also grew up in the Detroit area. My father was a professor of clinical urology at Wayne State University, and just being here, being back, makes me feel blessed. I don't know, John, you said it yesterday, I think we're all Detroiters, wherever we go. The only time I've ever been ashamed of being a Detroiter was when I saw emergency manager's plan alongside the subsidy for a new hockey arena. And I'm a big Red Wings fan, but I couldn't stomach that, and I had to write something in alternate that night before I could go to sleep. It irritated me to no end. So as I came off the airplane yesterday, I remember my father was also a semi-professional jazz pianist here in town, and I was in the music business for years. And often the way the Spirit communicates to me is through music. And I heard a song that I first heard when I was a youngster here from somebody that came from here. And the lyrics were, "Do you know where you're going to? Like the things that life is showing you. Where are you going to? Do you know?" Diana Ross and the theme from Mahogany. When I looked at my role along with the other panelists here at the solutions section, I thought her music kind of brought that to light. And she talks about that foolishness earlier in life. Once we were standing still, chasing fantasies that filled our minds. You know how I loved you, but my spirit was free, laughing at the questions that you once asked of me. So I start now with some questions, because I think at the core of what we have to define, vision that inspires our hearts to build forward, has to do with dignity. It has more to do with dignity than any material condition. Restore dignity and set the example that Ron suggests for all the other cities. We start with the notion that this city and cities and states and nations all over the world in this globalized capital market are suffering from a crisis of representativeness. No, you're not being represented when you watch that emergency manager's plan, and I'll talk about some of the dimensions of that. We know that we need these human services. One of the human services that we need to reestablish right now is trust in governance. Money, capital, is a dimension for the durable things that accompany school systems and infrastructure and other things. But money is a servant, it's not a master. And in our society, and you're looking at an old hedge fund manager, it's real obvious that the servants become the master. It's real obvious that some of the agents of this transformation, particularly the emergency manager, are grappling with that tension between servant and master. Cost of money for those future projects, and therefore for the resources of the state, are very important to manage. It's also important not to put up with financial shenanigans. You have to set the tone about what you won't tolerate. And my first recommendation would be to take those derivatives transactions that were discussed by Wally earlier today, and let's give them a haircut all the way down to zero. Yeah. Null and void is the reward for bad practices. Otherwise, the bad practices continue. And that's where we got to start. Finance has to be governed too, so that you can have strong schools, strong administration, strong arts, and public safety. So other things that I would do moving forward on the path of integrity is to have a commission that examines how Kevin Orr is paid, his compensations, his bonuses disclosed. I would look at this prospect, which I read about Sunday in the Detroit Free Press, of the professional relationship, of the Detroit water system being privatized, and I know Joe will talk more about that. What is Jones Day's relationship to all these big multinational companies? Is that being disclosed as part of this process? That's part of integrity of governance. I think this is a very dangerous thing, the privatization of water, because you're matching companies that know how to manipulate governments all over the world that are much larger in their revenues and their budget than the city of Detroit. And in this world of money politics, which we see going on in the Supreme Court given a green light to, you're going to be able to defend your water rates. So I think we have to look at these kinds of processes where money and corruption affect governance. If you're going to privatize the water system, who's going to watch that private company? Who's going to govern it? Who's going to stay on top of it? And how are you going to keep their money out of the pockets of people who aspire to higher office? We need repairs, not just in Detroit. I'm not singling out Detroit. It's just a case study of this malfunction. So I think it's kind of these companies like Suez and United Water, it's a David and Goliath interaction. And we've got problems in monitoring that. And by the way, the Detroit Free Press on Sunday had a couple of great articles. One editorial, one great article that really illuminated this, but we've got to get energized. Other things we need to have more and more pressure brought to bear on the ethics of this pension crisis. I've just done a study for the Roosevelt Institute that focused on Detroit as a case study. Public sector workers are not overpaid compared to their private sector counterpart. It's not a wage explosion causing this pension crisis. A bunch of monkey business that happened in the financial system that tripped us into a crisis, a downturn. There's federal austerity in large part because wealthy people don't want to pay taxes to support systems. And all of this trickles down into money cut off to the state, money from the state cut off to the city. And what we're doing now, because there may be some funny business in play-to-play, which also has to do with campaign finance of all these alternative investments like hedge funds and private equity. When this stuff comes crashing down and everybody's getting campaign contributions to run for the governor of Rhode Island or whatever, then you've got another type of crisis because they're now using that money. That money is either what belongs to the pensioners or that money is what the taxpayer has to make up the difference to honor the pensioners. Both of these are pools of public goods, and they're not being defended well from the vultures. That needs to be scrutinized, but if the result is, because of failure of governance, we cut the wages, particularly of highly skilled people, you're going to crash the public school system, and you're going to diminish the quality of administration all over this country. And that's not just in Detroit, that's everywhere, and we shouldn't stand for that. We got to have a rule of law. When the Michigan Constitution is not honored, I think there's a confusion. Rule of law depends upon a law protecting those who are not strong, not a law to impose the will of the strong onto the weak. And I think that now I'll render my most specific Michigan criticism. I was delighted, because of my love for the Diego Rivera murals, when I saw that foundations were going to support that art. But there was one sour note in that music. They tied that support to cutting of the pensions. They didn't tie that support to increasing water rates. They didn't tie that support to withholding of income tax for our suburban workers that work in the city, like the People's Plan suggested. They played a little class war on us, and I thought it was artless. And artlessness bothers me. That music was very, very stressful to experience alongside what looked like generosity. And the thing that made me hurt the most, almost done. The thing that made me hurt the most.
I'll yield him a minute.
I'm going to finish.
Okay. What made me hurt the most is I imagine being a pensioner sitting at home being told when they're cutting me down that I'm supposed to feel guilty because I'm causing the artwork to leave town by not accepting a bad deal. Now, what the hell is that about? What kind of foundation executive can look in the mirror when they're doing that? So, we got to come back with some positive art to propel us. And I found some this afternoon. Because I always say that art is living the experience deeply within yourself and struggling to communicate it to your community, to illuminate the aspects of their lives that they can feel. Because inside that feeling is a fuel for the idea and the changes about what is legitimate, to renew the norms of our culture. And what artwork did I feel? There's a woman sitting over here named Wendy. And she, excuse me one second, she designed a t-shirt. And the t-shirt on one side is breaking out of a cage. There's a little piece of straw in that bird's mouth. And on the other side of the t-shirt, as we're moving beyond this bankruptcy, that bird is bringing that straw to a new nest. And that's a metaphor for what we're doing. So I decided I better write a poem for Wendy while I was sitting here just listening to Ron, and it was feeling good. And I call it The First Straw. Seeing my city before and beyond, the conflict engulfs us, demands we respond. Fighting the forces of finance and greed, inhuman process compels us. Stand up and envision our need. We taste the injustice that leaves us each raw. Together, commit now to weave with new straw. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Detroiters Resisting Emergency Managers is a coalition of 38 groups and sundry individuals. And our job is to resist emergency managers. That has required us to focus on bankruptcy, but we by no means think this is about bankruptcy. What is going on is the intentional effort to restructure the city of Detroit for the benefit of white, wealthy corporate interests who have abandoned us for 50 years and discovered it's now good business to come back into Detroit. We are very clear about that. In fighting bankruptcy, we have done three things. One, we have supported court battles. Two, we have encouraged pensioners, each one of whom is named in the bankruptcy suit, to write objections. Because as people have said throughout the day, unless we understand the human impact of these things, it's all a crazy numbers game. Over 1,000 Detroiters have described in personal great detail what this bankruptcy would mean to them if Kevin Orr's plan went through. And thirdly, we are organizing demonstrations at the bankruptcy court. You are all welcome to join any of that. But we know that this restructuring is really what this is about. And the video I was going to show you is the juxtaposition between the new program, the new Athena development, and the people who are being evicted. Last week, the evictions occurred with 125 senior citizens, almost all African American, almost all disabled, and certainly all poor, were set aside so mostly white, mostly young, mostly hip people could move into a development. And that development is subsidized by tax money. And that is happening all over the 7.2 miles of the city that the rich folk care about. And we need to understand that that's what this is about. It is the reclaiming of a center city core for the benefit of white, wealthy people to have the rest of us serve them. Now, having said that, we decided that it is important for us to put together an alternative plan, which Peter and Pancella have made available out back. You can get that from the website, I'm not going to read all of this, but there are 3 things I want to point out quickly. One is, in the 3rd paragraph down, we say that we are projecting a number of alternatives for the restructuring of the city. And we are doing these because they are rooted in the certainty of our capacity to envision and create a city culture in which human rights are protected and citizens enjoy a higher quality of life. We believe it is possible for the young hipster and the elder senior to live together in dignity in a city. And we believe we have a history of doing that in the city of Detroit. Because while the corporations were gone, we were faced with the realization that our economy will not grow, but our human capacities could. And it was out of that belief that we have created the largest urban gardening movement on the globe. We are redefining the relations of the city and the country. It is out of that belief that we have created some of the most imaginative art, and as you have heard, music on the globe, that we are taking the transformation of ourselves and our city seriously. And I want to raise for us this question. Do we believe that the great African American migration to the cities of the North have opened our imaginations for the kind of life we can have, or do we not believe that? Because I think we have to recognize that this assault is not only an assault on democracy, it is an assault on the progressive human values that have been raised consistently in this country by the African American struggles for freedom and justice. And that is what is under assault here. So we urge you to read this plan. We have a section on financial security. We have a section on community life. We have a section on self-government and a section on youth. In each of those, we are building on some creative activity that is already taking place, because we know a new Detroit is already in process, and it is based on the values that everyone needs if we are going to have humane urban life in the 21st century. Thank you.
It's good to be here. I want to give thanks to Brother John, to Brother Hester Wheeler, and of course to those who put this great event together, Moses, Wayne State Law School, Haas Institute, the Detroit Wayne County Health Authority, and all others. Some time ago, several months ago, as a pastor here in Detroit and a resident, I was always upset about the bankruptcy, and after hearing, which I'll read my statement, I had written it several months ago for some pastors. But after hearing the statement about the emergency managers calling us, dumb, lazy, I heard it that day and I couldn't go to sleep that night. And I got up, pulled my laptop out, and I wanted to vent some of the anger, so I started writing. And I wish I had had the benefit of this conference before I did the writing, but you can hear why. Let me just read it for you. It says, "We, the people of Detroit. As a resident and pastor of a congregation in Detroit, I am concerned about the bankruptcy process and outcomes. The bankruptcy of Detroit is on a fast track. Why so fast? The people are not at the table to develop the plan or to have input in the plan that will be presented on our behalf to the court. After the court rules on the plan, Kevin Orr will leave and go back to Maryland. The lawyers and consultants will leave as well. And we, the people of Detroit, will be stuck with a plan that is not our plan. The governor lives near Ann Arbor. We will be stuck with what someone who has no skin in the game feels that we should have and not have. I don't have high hopes after being called dumb, lazy, and rich that this plan will be in my interest or in the best interest of the majority of the residents of Detroit. I hope that I'm wrong, but it doesn't look good thus far. We're being taxed, seized, nullified, and litigated without a voice, vote, or representation of our choice. After the bankruptcy dust clears, we will determine if we are better off or worse. The die will be cast. This is a first for a city as large as Detroit. Although Detroit is not the first major city to find itself in financial problems, it will set a precedent. Several years ago, New York City was on the brink of bankruptcy, but it got help from the state of New York and the U.S. government. I'm corrected by this. I wish I had this conference. The lady that presented earlier said Gerald Ford was president, right? And the federal government didn't help New York, but it got state help. Could it be that Wall Street is more important than Main Street? Could it be due to the fact that our city is over 80% African American? Why did New York deserve help and we don't? I wonder, would anyone have thought of putting the public assets like Central Park or the New York Public Library up for sale or lease? Would New Yorkers want or let their voting rights be stripped from them? No way. But in Detroit, this is a reality. Detroit will not get the same help. Why let Detroit go bankrupt? Why don't we deserve a bailout? Cobo Hall, Detroit Zoo, the DIA, Water Department, and other public assets that make for the quality of life and the well-being of a community. Most of these assets we own, but we don't manage them. We have carried the above assets with our tax dollars for years. It is my understanding that we don't have to sell these assets. We can maintain ownership, but we might have to leverage them differently. We as Detroiters are aware of this arrangement because, as stated above, we own assets that we don't control. We don't control. We don't want to lose equity in any of our assets. The DIA, Cobo Hall, the Detroit Zoo are historic city assets. What city or person would? If we let something go, we ought to make that choice for ourselves. We are the owners, but someone is making that choice for us if we are not the owners. The bondholders and bankers are in business to take risks with investments. There is risk in any investment. They invested in Detroit and made billions over the years. Many of their investments are insured. They will not take major losses. The insurance companies are in business to take risks to insure potential losses. This is their business. They pay out when there is a loss, and they make profits when there is no loss. They are being asked to take a hit. Well, the residents and retired workers have no insurance to mitigate their potential loss. They're being asked to take a hit when they are not in the investment business or insurance business. They are just workers, retirees, and residents who have been given good faith promises. Now those promises are being breached. They have done their part of the contract by working until retirement. We only have the courts to protect our interests. The government will not help us as it did with New York City and others. If we fail to get justice from our judicial system, then the system has failed its people. It has failed the state and federal constitution. We the people have been sold out. This country was founded on we the people and the protection of the people's rights. We the people of Detroit have endured little public safety and unreliable public services at best. We the people have been redlined with ridiculous auto and homeowner insurance rates. The state of Michigan has taken over control over the Detroit public schools. Prior to the takeover, there was a surplus, and now we are in a deficit financially, and many of our children are still not getting a quality education. We, the people, have supported the failures of the automobile industry and their bailout with our tax dollars. We, the people of Detroit, like other cities, have been victims of predatory lending practices that have destroyed many of our neighborhoods, which these banks were bailed out with our tax dollars. State revenue sharing has not been fair to Detroit, but destructive to the economic viability of Detroit. Years of disinvestment in Detroit and the change in residency laws has helped to decimate Detroit's tax base. These and other policies help to depopulate Detroit. Yet the people of Detroit, the victims, have been blamed for this situation that has been set in motion for over 60 years. If Detroit is to have a fair chance to rise again after bankruptcy, many of the above policies must change. We, the people of Detroit who have a vested interest, must wake up, speak up, vote up, shake up, and fight up. The federal court must hold the state of Michigan bondholders, bankers, and others accountable for their role in Detroit's fate. We, the residents and leaders, are not responsible for Detroit's demise on our own. We had help. It is time for those who profited on Detroit to pay, and not the residents, retirees, and the businesses that have stayed in the city for years supporting this city. We have already paid. We, the people, ask for justice.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, but I got a text message from John Powell with detailed information about what I was to do. He had the question asked, what about the bankruptcy in Detroit? So if you get that kind of message from John Powell, you go and start studying, which I did, went through all of the information I could get, and kind of focused on an issue that Rob brought up a little bit ago, dignity. And I went right to the pensioners, and the deal that was being offered them. And then I looked at another extraordinary asset of the city of Detroit, and the water and sewer district. The water and sewer district is an extraordinary asset. The people of Detroit, generations of pensioners past, started it in 1836. Long before the zoning issues, long before World War II, long before the financial shenanigans. But that water and sewer district was built, that infrastructure was built when only Detroit could have built it. And it serves an enormous population, almost 4 million people. It represents 1,034 square miles, almost 10 times the size of Detroit, and serves 4 million people. So it is an enormous asset. It's also an exclusive asset. It is really difficult to run 3,450 miles of water and sewer and have the easements and right-of-ways to do all that. So it took more than a century to build it. And one of the things that's being considered is turning it over to the private sector. My thought on this was that the public servants ought to be paid with the public service, and that public service is the water and sewer district. So my recommendation was, and is, that the water and sewer district be turned over to an authority that is controlled by, or for the benefit of, the pensioners. So no longer are they worried about having their pensions cut in this generation or later generations, but it would actually have the ownership right of the water and sewer district. Many of them built it, and they would have the benefit of it. The water and sewer district generates $550 million a year of revenue. More than half of it comes from the suburbs. It's the only part of Detroit that is fully integrated. If you look at the school districts, if you look at the property values, if you look at the jurisdictions, it covers 130 municipal jurisdictions. It's the only integrated feature in the whole region, and it can't be given up to a private sector. And it also can't be held in a chokehold by the city of Detroit, with the city of Detroit with an edict or their charter saying they can't make money with it. Actually, what needs to be done is it needs to be treated as a valuable asset. It needs to be turned over for the benefit of the pensioners. The pensioners would not have any cut in their pensions. They would have the full funding. These pensioners, plus the existing city workers who will be pensioners in the future, because it's an asset that can pay over a long period of time. There are $6 billion of debt associated with the water and sewer district, all of which is being serviced fully now. It's a successful district. It could be more successful if, through the bankruptcy, the contracts with the suburban areas throughout the multi-county area were renegotiated under more favorable terms that are more appropriate to the actual service that's being delivered. So my recommendation is that we look closely at the water and sewer district, prevent it from being privatized. I might add, when you're following the money, as Rob had mentioned, and was mentioned earlier today, that the request for information that was published on March 27th, the closing for that was yesterday. So in 10 days, 41 companies from around the world lit onto Detroit with proposals to take it over. Whenever you get that much action, and we're talking about companies that have $30 billion a year in revenue, that dwarf the city of Detroit. They have work in 50 countries. They're European companies. They want to swoop in and do this. You know there's something valuable there. And so in following that money, you'd go right to the source and say, well, if it's valuable, maybe the pensioners need to have sufficient control over it so they have the benefit. Now, I'm not talking about the pensioners going on emergency water and sewer repairs. It's professionally managed, but the benefits of that, the pension funding would be fully funded into the future. So I wrote a short paper on it. It's up at the front. I think Poinsella had copied it, but we'll put it on the website. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. I know it's a short time and it's a lot of information, but I'm grateful to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, John, and thanks to all the organizers of the conference for the opportunity to speak here. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about basically the relationship between our cities and Wall Street banks, which I think we'd all agree is fundamentally broken. And I want to talk about, what are some options that cities have for trying to actually renegotiate that relationship. So, one of the things that's happened in our economy over the last 35 to 40 years is, really not just our economy, but in the entire political discourse, is that there has been this attack on government, right? Government's a problem, not the solution. We need to drown government in a bathtub. As this has happened, we've had, it's had real consequences for taxes. So corporate tax rates have gone down, drastically over the last 35, 40 years. Same has happened with the taxes for the top income brackets, for individual income taxes. As that's happened, cities and states have still had to, the needs have actually kept growing. And so in order to actually make ends meet, they've had to borrow record levels of money. Of course, a lot of debt is actually perfectly necessary, but in a lot of cases you have cities that have been forced to borrow to make ends meet for short-term things that they used to be able to pay for. As this has happened, banks have fundamentally really swooped in to take advantage. The same way that cash-strapped homeowners and families have basically been forced to replace debt with income, or rather replace income with debt. As our wages haven't kept up, we've started to take on more and more debt. Well, banks swooped in and basically started targeting cash-strapped homeowners with predatory loans that had hidden risks, hidden costs that were designed to fail ultimately. Well, the same thing has actually happened with cities and states. So Wally talked about this earlier with the interest rate swap and the swap and COP transaction that was set up for Detroit. Another example that came to mind earlier when the brother from AFSCME was speaking was in Puerto Rico, where they just recently had a credit rating downgrade that triggered a whole bunch of termination payments and accelerated payments and swaps and other things. Basically, very quickly, Puerto Rico owed $1 billion at exactly the time they would have had a very tough time raising money in the markets because it had taken a hit on its credit rating, which is like your credit score. If you have a low credit score, it's hard to get good interest rates or good loans. And so the solution was there's a group of hedge funds that swooped in and said, we'll lend you the money, but we're going to charge you, I believe it was 10% interest, which is really high for cities and states, or in the case of Puerto Rico, colonies. We're going to, and on top of that, we're going to put a lien on a lot of your public assets. They're also, as part of that, there's a clause in the bond covenants that says that the investors will get to decide which courts any legal challenges are heard in, which is, again, interesting in the case of Puerto Rico in particular, because it's this, colonial situation where it's, and what this actually does is it lets the hedge funds or whoever the hedge funds sell the debt to basically take any legal challenges that arise out of the Puerto Rican courts and move them to the New York courts where they'll be on friendlier ground. And so really, what me and a group of people we've been working with have started saying is that this is actually no different from predatory lending. This is predatory municipal lending. And what we need to start doing is really thinking about how we can fight that back, because the fact is that this actually has a big impact on our budget. So there's a report that came out in LA a couple of weeks ago that showed that the city of Los Angeles paid $205 million in fees, just bank fees last year. 1 year alone, $205 million in fees. That's more than the city's entire streets and street services budget. And the fact is that municipal finance is a zero-sum game. Any money that's going to Wall Street is money that's not going to public services. And so that's what the cost is. And so there's really, cities need to take a three-pronged approach to actually beating this back and fundamentally renegotiating their relationships with Wall Street. So I've been starting to call, me and again, people I've been working with, we're calling this reclaim, reduce, recoup. So with reclaim, the idea is any business we're doing with Wall Street, their main goal is to figure out how much, how they can get their pound of flesh. So we need to reclaim as much of the business as we can for ourselves. And so what that means is we need to come up with public options, things like creating public banks. So there's the state-owned Bank of North Dakota that already exists. There are ideas people are talking about. Could we have either more state-owned banks or banks that are owned by cities? There's a proposal that was advanced by the Postal Service around bringing back postal banking. What are the ideas to actually have public options in banking? Another idea along these lines is what are things that can be insourced? So for instance, a lot of money is spent by cities and pension funds in particular on investment management. Well, could you bring some of that in-house and actually have in-house managers to, again, take Wall Street out of the picture? Some of the other ideas, the Federal Reserve, when the banks were on the verge of failure, the Federal Reserve stepped in and bought up all of their toxic assets, which is bad loans that they had on their books. Well, why can't the Federal Reserve actually buy municipal debt? There's a reason why it can't, which is that there's policies, but what can we do to actually change the policies to actually allow the Federal Reserve to directly buy municipal debt to actually give cities and states access to the same affordable financing that banks can get currently, and that is available to others. Another example of this would be to actually have, there are other services like credit enhancements, which are types of bond insurance that states can actually provide for school districts or smaller municipalities, and some states like Washington State already do that. And so again, what are things that either we can set up public entities like public banks or create public options. With reduce, the idea is how do we fundamentally band together, how do we have cities come together to start bargaining over fundamental fees, right? So there are fee structures that are considered sacrosanct, they're decided by the market. Well, the market is an artificial construct. It's not something that automatically exists. We need cities come together to fight for lower fees, collectively bargain for it. The recoup is basically where there's been wrongdoing, fraud, actually sue to get the money back and claw back any money that's been ill-gotten. And so those are some ideas to move forward. And I got to run. So thanks.
Thank you, Saki.
Okay, so 6 minutes to talk about systemic change in community wealth building shouldn't be a problem. I wanted to start just with a proposition that I haven't heard at this conference, but I think is worth stating, which is that American capitalism is not healthy. So I think that's important to recognize. And so just three numbers to think about. One number is 15.68 trillion. That's the size of the US economy presently in terms of gross domestic product. Second number is 312.9 million. That's the population of the United States. The third number is 49,700. That's what you get when you divide that population by GDP. So what that means is that the US economy at present, for a family of four, is producing about $200,000 in value, the average family. Now, how can that be when we know the median household income is between, depending on how you measure it, between 50 and 70,000, right? And the answer, of course, is our extraordinary inequality of wealth. A couple years ago, there was a comparison made by Michael Moore, and it's been fact-checked and so forth, that the top 400 individuals, the Forbes 400 list that you're probably familiar with, had 1.27 trillion in wealth, and the bottom 60% of the US population, the bottom three quintiles, so that's 185 million people roughly, had 1.21 trillion in wealth. That was 2 years ago. The most recent data says that 1.27 trillion is now 2.02 trillion in 2 years. So just to translate, that means in 2 years, the wealth of the top 400 individuals in the United States has gone up by $750 billion, or 1.75 billion per person. So that's the big context. And so I think there's an interesting question. Grace Lee Boggs, who of course is from Detroit or been here for many decades at least, talks about the need for a next American revolution. And so we need to consider whether what the project in Detroit is about, inclusion in the existing system or actually trying to create a new economy, in the shell of the old system. And I don't think we'll answer that question, but it's an important question to keep in the back of our mind. So those are all big numbers. What do we do about it in Detroit? And I should say, I did live in Southeast Michigan for a few years, from 98 to 2003. Worked for a while as a researcher in the organizing department of the Steelworkers, and then at NASCO, which was mentioned in my bio. So I'm familiar with the area. I'm on the board of the Center for Community-Based Enterprises here, and Michael Friedman's the chair of the board, is in the audience there. And try to work with folks like Moses, who's one of the co-sponsors. Thank you for organizing this, as well as Church on the Side and some other partners. And so one strategy, I think, is to build what we call the Democracy Collaborative Community Wealth. And that means developing community-owned enterprises. And what are some of the principles? Because I don't think I'm going to get a chance to go into much detail. And the idea is to start with values, to develop productive assets, to develop, and really to anchor wealth locally by tying business development to local enterprise. So how do you do that? Well, one way, you have the three largest employers in Detroit, as you may be aware, are not actually General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. They are instead Wayne State University here, Henry Ford Health System, and Detroit Medical Center. So you have these eds and meds. These are nonprofit institutions. They have a public purpose. They're not profit maximizing institutions. Their boards of trustees may think they are, but that's not what they legally are. And so those can be leveraged. And in Cleveland, Ohio, where the Democracy Collaboratives worked, University Hospitals had a project called Vision 2010. It was a $1.2 billion construction project. And by setting targets for minority hiring, local hiring, hiring of women-owned business contractors, they were able to direct 5,200 jobs into the local economy. So this is something that can actually be done. It was done at the height of the Great Recession. They were really the only cranes in the air were the ones that were building new buildings for the Cleveland Clinic and University Hospitals and Case Western. You can also develop cooperative enterprises that are employee-owned in low-income communities, and we've been doing that work. And so we have employee-owned laundry, which does about 10 million pounds of laundry. It's a green laundry that uses 1/4 as much water as a conventional laundry, solar and LED lighting installation company, and we just started a greenhouse last year that can grow about 3 million head of lettuce. It's the size of 3 football fields. And all these businesses, at least a portion of their procurement is linked to the needs of the institutions. So what you're trying to do is bring back the money that's leaking out of the community and capture it in the community, and then use the employee ownership mechanism to spread the wealth among the community. So I encourage that to be part of the people's plan, to be something that's thought about in terms of community wealth building. A couple other things that I think should just be mentioned quickly. Hospitals. In the Affordable Care Act, there's a Section 9007, yes, there's a Section 9007 of the Affordable Care Act, that requires nonprofit community hospitals to do a community health needs assessment. They have to publish these assessments on their website. So that's a process that's kind of like an nascent CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, for hospitals, only started in 2012. It is a new opportunity for community intervention. As we know, the largest cause of poor healthcare outcomes is poverty. So that, and as hospitals begin to be evaluated more on population health, in other words, whether people in the surrounding community are healthy rather than acute care or solving health problems once it's reached an emergency stage, the financial interest in the hospitals in community development is going to increase, and that can be leveraged. Couple other things quickly. Planning, I see the time coming. So just two quick comments. Planning is important, and having a long-term vision. This can actually grow. In Spain, there's the Mondragon Cooperative, started with a Catholic priest and 5 workers in 1956, is now 80,000 workers, $20 billion in business. This thing can actually scale. It takes decades of time. It's not quick. Last, community engagement. Really important to couple business development with social capital formation. And so I don't want to suggest that you can just do this by business alone, but I think community-controlled businesses where there is ownership can make a difference in Detroit, and happy to talk about these things.
Thank you, Steve. So again, I want to add my thanks and a couple of quotes. To paraphrase James Baldwin, he says, to paraphrase him, if you get involved, it doesn't mean you'll win, but if you don't get involved, you surely will lose. To paraphrase another famous American philosopher, James Brown, to James, James Brown says in a song, basically, I refuse to lose. He said, I don't know if I win, but I refuse to lose. So it was great spending time with you. I'm a little tired. I want to thank all the people that Peter thanked. I want to thank all of you, but also want to thank you for going forward. As Hester says, this is not a moment, this is a movement. And so I want to be part of this movement with you. So let's move forward, and let's join you in the reception and have some food and relax a little bit.